Right, we have a special guest here with us, the one, the only, the true market expert of us all, John Kingston, live from San Diego. John, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Anthony.
So, John, you're in San Diego. You're at yet another conference. How's it going over there?
Well, it's the turnout is amazing. It's like 1,500 people. Heard an interesting stat yesterday. There are about 2,000 members of TIA, and they're believed to be like at least 20,000 brokers in the country. So you can see it's a great turnout, but a relatively small percentage of the brokers out there. So it's going well. There hasn't been a lot of talk that I've heard about the past couple of weeks, which we know when you get these kind of declining spot rates, it's really good for brokers. Let me see some of the highlights. I just published on freightwaves.com a story about a session I attended yesterday about brokerage companies needing to. It was kind of a two-pronged panel. One of it was what they need to do to stay legally separate from their freight, so that if there's some kind of an insurance claim, they're not going to get it, and they're not going to get hit by it. But Eric, and I'm forgetting his last name now, of the Benish law firm, said, a lot of companies just ignore it anyway. They will sign a transportation contract with a shipper that it really sets up their liability because they want the business. And he says, we can talk to these clients till we're blue in the face, and it doesn't really matter. They'll still go out and sign that contract. Then that kind of went into a discussion about merger and acquisition activity, and that the market for brokerages is pretty hot. It has kind of stayed at a 5 to 7 times multiple of EBITDA for companies with EBITDA below $10 million. And I think what I found most interesting in that is, brokerages are supposed to be dying, right? The digital business is supposed to be killing them off, and that's not the case. Clearly, if you've got multiples that at least are hanging in there, and there's just a lot of demand for them, either by trucking companies looking to add a brokerage capability, or by trucking companies with a brokerage capability looking to add to it. That really does kind of undercut the argument that everybody's going to go Uber Freight and all sorts of digital operations, and we're going to strip the humans out. I don't think anybody really thinks that anymore. But I think it kind of emphasized the point that there's still going to be a role for human-based brokerages.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, we talk about freight and how it really is a human, the interactions, a lot of what's going on. It's very hard that on the digital side to have those just 100% on. I mean, because if things go wrong, they've got to call somebody, right? And their point of contact is going to be a human.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have those soft touch point, those soft skills for sure, and build those relationships. John, when you're thinking about, of course, we're talking about it all over the place on FreightWaves, is that oncoming freight recession that we're kind of heading into, volumes really taking a dive. When we see the overall growth, and not just in brokerages, but carriers as well, it's not all the same. We're seeing some individuals that were maybe new that kind of came onto the market after to just kind of take advantage of the ongoing growth. We're seeing some that just never really grew their client base, but just started charging more. And so margins were just a little bit bumped up. And so that's definitely going to help as well. But when we're looking at those that maybe were a little bit shaky throughout this really ramp up throughout the pandemic, you can be sloppy because rates are so high, and that's going to cover up for a lot of mistakes. As we start to see volumes come down, rates really start to get diminished from time to time moving forward. Do you see that as a potential downfall for a lot of companies, a lot of 3PLs potentially that maybe aren't able to run as efficient because their margins aren't going to be as impressive as to never really gone through a down cycle like this before?
Well, the margins weren't that great for brokers. They were okay, but the TIA does send to FreightWaves, sends to me their quarterly report that they send out to their members, and it's a survey of how margins did. So, for the first quarter report, no, it would have been the fourth quarter report, excuse me. I published that several weeks ago. Like, the margins were okay. In some cases, they were down, depending on the kind of classification that they were, but they were not the rates may have been great for the drivers, the rates may have been great for the carriers, but the margins were not great for brokerage companies. So I don't know that I really agree with you that they're coming off some kind of salad days. They were doing fine, but actually, if you go back to, let's say, the second quarter of last year, that's when they did really well, because that's the kind of situation where brokers do particularly well, when they've got contract rates that are locked in and you've got plunging spot rates. Remember that the plunging spot rates were so low that it led to this sort of brief war between drivers and brokers, and the former TIA head. Did I say last year? I meant 2020. Bob Voltman took a really rare step of making a video, put it up on YouTube, and said, it isn't our fault. It isn't the broker's fault. Now, Bob separated from the TIA not that long after, and it's not ever been completely clear whether the membership didn't want him to do that, and therefore they pushed him out. But that was a kind of period where brokers, in fact, probably were making really good money because of the decline in spot rates, and contrasting that with the contract rates. I do want to mention something on the Voltman video, because I maybe it's just me hearing this, but Ann Reinke, who is the new, not relatively new, 18 months president of TIA, gave her kind of State of the Union speech yesterday, said the markets, the industry's doing great, all the freight that's out there. And she said something about, we're going to be your advocates without grabbing headlines. And maybe it's just me, because I covered that story when Bob Voltman made that video, but I just couldn't help it here. I'm not going to make any video like that. That was my interpretation.
Yeah, you make a great point there about how brokers deal with these. They kind of act. There is some friction when, rates bottom out with drivers. Obviously we've seen this decline in spot rates happening now. Obviously they're still elevated compared to where they were, say, pre-pandemic, or even like you mentioned in 2020. But has there been any talk amongst members out there at the conference about these falling spot rates and how basic overall market conditions, if they're kind of lining up with what we're seeing in our sonar data?
I think it's so established right now that nobody's really saying, hey, did you notice that spot rates are declining? And, they are, and everybody realizes it. So, as I said, this is a kind of period, though, that's maybe not be all that bad for brokers. So I guess I probably haven't been to enough sessions to hear that discussion. So really, the focus at a meeting like this tends to be about building your business. Remember something that, when you go to a meeting like this, you get disclaimer after disclaimer after disclaimer that we are not going to be in conflict with antitrust provisions. So they really cannot talk about prices, because they could be viewed as working at a meeting like this, as crazy as it sounds, to set prices. So they kind of stay away from that discussion.
And John, you bring some great insights here, but one of the areas that you really can dive into deeply, for sure, diesel markets. Are you seeing anything different around the oil markets as you're kind of keeping your finger on the pulse there with everything else?
Now, when you say different, do you mean in the last week or the last 5 minutes? Because really, we can have that talk.
Let's have that talk.
It is just nuts out there, down and up and down and up. Here's what I'd say about diesel, a couple things. I don't know if you've got that chart that I sent overnight. There we go. So this is the value of diesel relative to New York Harbor jet fuel. It has plummeted. And here's why it's relevant. It hasn't really plummeted so much as jet has gone absolutely crazy. And it's gone crazy in part because when diesel markets were really stronger a couple of months ago, refineries were making diesel and less jet, because the two of them are both distillates. So when a refinery decides what to do, it's like, how much diesel do I make? How much heating oil do I make? How much jet do I make? They really didn't make enough jet. The price of jet this past week went to levels relative to diesel that are absolutely unheard of. So where this is not good for buyers, diesel buyers, is that now a refinery is going to be incentivized to make more jet and less diesel. I'm not saying you're going to get the kind of craziness in diesel that you had here in jet this past week, but I do think that we're in the middle of a market that is. If you're waiting for an end to volatility, it's not happening anytime soon. And it's entirely possible to see refineries undershoot the amount of diesel that they need to make. On the other hand, you've been talking all morning. All morning's only about 15 minutes, but you have been talking about the freight slowdown. And the numbers that came out from the EIA statistical report this week showed demand for all distillates, which includes diesel but not jet, as dropping, and dropping pretty significantly, to the point that inventories measured in days cover climbed, which you just wouldn't think this now. So I think that you're starting to see that slowdown in truck traffic start to impact on diesel demand, and that may be another blow to another aspect that could soften the blow. Final point here, Javier Blas, who covers commodities for Bloomberg, really good reporter. He had a report out yesterday that they're finding ways to export Russian diesel blended with other countries' products out of the ports of the Baltics. And as a result of that, a lot more oil is getting out of Russia than anticipated. Now, I'm not going to get political here and say whether that's good or bad in terms of the war with Ukraine, but in terms of diesel buyers, that obviously is good news. But, if you think you're going to be avoiding Russian diesel, if that's going on, you're not going to be doing that.
Amazing. John, thank you so much for joining us this morning and waking up early from San Diego to be on this morning. Always amazing having you on. We'll be sure to check in with you throughout your time there.
Okay, thanks, guys.